Mother's Day was supposed to be peaceful. That afternoon my son arrived at my small home carrying a bouquet of bright tulips. The flowers were beautiful, almost too beautiful for my quiet living room. He placed them gently on the table and looked around the house the way people do when they visit a place they no longer belong to. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he said. For a moment, my heart felt full. It had been months since I last saw him. "My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 67 years old and a widow living alone in a modest house outside Dallas, Texas. Years ago this house was filled with laughter. My husband and I raised our only son here, watching him grow from a curious little boy into a successful man. After my husband passed away 10 years ago, the house became quieter. I spent my days tending the garden, reading, and occasionally helping at St. Mary's Church nearby. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. At least, it used to be. My son David is now 38 and extremely successful. He owns several technology companies, drives expensive cars, and lives in a massive mansion across the city. I always believed I raised him to be hardworking and kind. So when he sat down across from me that day, I expected a simple conversation. Instead, he asked a question that made my heart stop. "Mom," he said casually, "Clara still sends you the $5,000 every month, right? I just wanted to make sure you're comfortable." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. $5,000. My fingers tightened around the edge of my apron. For the past 8 months, I had been surviving mostly on food donations from the church and occasional help from kind neighbors. My electricity bill was overdue, and sometimes I skipped meals just to stretch my grocery money. I swallowed slowly. "David, the church has been helping me," I said quietly. The smile on his face disappeared. "What do you mean?" he asked. Before I could answer, the front door opened and a familiar voice drifted inside. "Well, this is awkward." David's wife, Clara, stepped into the room. She looked elegant as always, silk dress, sparkling heels, and the strong scent of expensive perfume filling the air. Her smile was flawless. But her eyes? Cold. "Oh, Margaret," she said sweetly, "don't tell me you forgot again. I personally bring the money every month." The room suddenly felt smaller. David looked at me, then at Clara. Someone wasn't telling the truth. And deep down, I already knew who it was. But what happened next would expose a lie far bigger than anyone expected. And the truth David discovered that day would completely destroy his perfect marriage. The silence in my living room felt heavier than a storm cloud. David looked from Clara, back to me. His brows slowly tightened, confusion spreading across his face. "Clara," he said carefully, "you've been giving Mom the money every month, haven't you?" Clara let out a soft laugh, the kind that sounds polite, but carries something sharp underneath. "Of course I have," she replied smoothly. "David, don't tell me you're doubting me now." She walked across the room confidently and placed her designer handbag on the table, as if she owned the house. I watched her closely. For 8 months she had visited once every few weeks. She would come inside briefly, ask me a few polite questions, and leave quickly. She always carried that same handbag. But never, not once, had she given me any money. David rubbed his forehead, clearly trying to understand what was happening. "Mom wouldn't lie about something like this," he muttered. Clara crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. "Well," she said, her tone calm but icy, "maybe Margaret is just confused." Confused. The word stung more than I expected. I had raised David by working 2 jobs. I had balanced every bill, every responsibility, every hardship. I knew exactly what reality looked like. And I certainly knew the difference between receiving $5,000 and not receiving it. I'm not confused, I said quietly. Clara's smile twitched for the briefest moment. David looked uncomfortable now. The tension in the room was growing thicker by the second. Clara, he said again, how have you been giving her the money? Without hesitation she answered. I always hand it to her personally when I visit. That was the moment something inside David shifted. Because he knew something she didn't realize. During the past 8 months, David had been traveling constantly for business. But he had installed security cameras at the entrance of my house after my husband passed away. He said it was for my safety. At the time, I didn't think much about it. But now. David slowly pulled out his phone. Clara's confident posture stiffened slightly. What are you doing? She asked. Just checking something, David replied calmly. He opened an app and began scrolling through the recorded camera history. Clara's perfectly composed smile slowly began to fade. Because deep down, she knew exactly what those cameras might reveal. And within seconds, David was about to discover a truth that would completely shatter the trust he had in his wife. But what the camera footage showed next was even worse than any of us expected. Because Clara hadn't just lied about the money. She had been hiding something far more dangerous. David stared at his phone screen as the camera footage loaded. The room had become so quiet that I could hear the ticking clock on the wall. Clara stood near the window now, her arms folded tightly. For the first time since she arrived, she looked uneasy. Here, David murmured as he opened one of the recordings. The video showed the front porch of my house. A few seconds passed, and then Clara appeared on the screen. She was wearing the same elegant coat I remembered. In the recording she walked up to the door, knocked once, and then glanced quickly around the street, as if checking whether anyone was watching. David's eyes narrowed. That's one of the days you visited, he said slowly. Clara forced a smile. Exactly. That proves what I told you. But David didn't answer. Instead, he fast-forwarded the video. The recording showed Clara standing at the door for only a moment before I opened it. We spoke briefly, and then she stepped inside. Everything looked normal so far. But David kept scrolling through the footage. Another recording appeared on the screen. Another visit. Another day Clara came to the house. But something strange happened this time. When Clara walked up to the door, she reached into her handbag, pulled out an envelope, and then paused. She looked down at the envelope for a moment. Then, slowly, she placed it back inside her bag. David leaned closer to the screen. Clara's breathing suddenly became shallow. She was supposed to give that envelope to Mom, David whispered. The video continued. Clara knocked on the door. I opened it. She smiled, stepped inside, and the recording ended. David looked up. Mom, he asked quietly, did Clara give you an envelope that day? I shook my head slowly. Not that day, not any day. David opened more recordings. Visit after visit appeared on the screen. And every time, the same thing happened. Clara would arrive carrying an envelope. But before knocking on the door, she would slip it back into her purse. The color drained from David's face. That money, he muttered. Where did it go? Clara finally stepped forward. David, this is ridiculous, she said sharply. You're jumping to conclusions. But David wasn't listening anymore. Because suddenly he remembered something else. 3 months ago Clara had bought a brand new luxury car, one she claimed she purchased with her own savings. At the time, David didn't question it. But now, the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made his stomach turn. He slowly lifted his eyes toward Clara. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Did you really give my mother the money, or did you spend it yourself?" Clara's silence said more than any answer ever could. But the truth David was about to uncover next would reveal that the missing money was only the beginning of Clara's betrayal. Because the next discovery would expose a secret account, and a plan that could have ruined David's entire future. And when David finally checked the bank records, the truth shocked everyone in the room. David slowly lowered his phone onto the table. The room felt colder now. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Clara stood perfectly still, but the confidence she walked in with had clearly faded. David finally broke the silence. "Clara," he said quietly, "every month I transferred $5,000 to you. I trusted you to give it to my mother." His voice wasn't loud, but the disappointment in it was heavy. Clara inhaled slowly and tried to regain her composure. "David, you're misunderstanding the situation," she said. "There were other expenses. Things I had to handle." David frowned. "Other expenses," he repeated. She nodded quickly. "Yes. Household things. Investments. I plan to give Margaret the money later once everything's settled." I watched my son's face carefully. He wasn't angry yet. But something deeper was forming in his expression. Doubt. David picked up his phone again and opened his banking app. "I sent you $40,000 over the last 8 months, he said slowly. Clara remained silent. David scrolled through the transaction history, his eyes moving quickly across the screen. Then suddenly he stopped. "Wait." His fingers froze. Another account name appeared next to several transfers Clara had made from their shared account. It wasn't a household payment. It wasn't an investment account either. It was a private account. David looked up at her. "Who is Evan Carter?" he asked. Clara's face went pale. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. David stood up from his chair. "I've never heard that name before," he said. "Why are thousands of dollars being transferred to him?" Clara tried to speak, but the words didn't come easily now. It's not what you think," she finally said. But David was already tapping on his phone again. Within seconds, he opened a social media profile connected to the same name. A photo appeared on the screen. A young man, maybe in his early 30s, standing next to a luxury sports car. And right beside him was Clara. The picture looked recent. David's hands slowly began to shake. "You've been sending him my money," he whispered. Clara's silence was louder than any confession. My heart sank as I watched my son realize what had truly been happening. The missing money wasn't just about greed. It was about betrayal. But the final truth David discovered next was the one thing Clara had hoped he would never find out. Because the next message he opened would reveal a secret conversation that completely destroyed her story. And when David read those messages aloud, Clara's entire plan collapsed in front of everyone. David's hands trembled as he opened the message history connected to the account. Clara suddenly stepped forward. "David, stop," she said quickly. But it was too late. The messages were already on the screen. David read the first one silently. Then another. And another. His expression slowly shifted from confusion to disbelief. Finally, he looked up at Clara. "How long?" he asked. Clara didn't answer. David swallowed hard. These messages go back almost a year, he said quietly. Before you even told me you were helping Mom with the money. Clara's shoulders dropped. The carefully built image she had maintained for so long was beginning to crumble. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered. David laughed bitterly. You took money meant for my mother, and gave it to someone else. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek, though it didn't seem to change the reality in the room. It started small, she said. I thought I could replace the money before you noticed. But you didn't, David replied. Silence filled the room again. I watched my son carefully. The pain in his eyes was something no parent ever wants to see. Finally, David took a deep breath. Clara, he said calmly, I think you should leave. Her eyes widened. David. Please, he said firmly. For a moment it looked like she might argue. But then she grabbed her handbag, walked toward the door, and stopped briefly. I never meant to hurt you, she said softly. David didn't respond. The door closed behind her a moment later. The house became quiet again. David sat down slowly and rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. I should have checked sooner. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, I said gently, people show us who they really are when we least expect it. David nodded slowly. But one thing was certain. From that day forward, he would never ignore the small warning signs again. And sometimes the most painful truths are the ones that protect us from even bigger mistakes.